Hi everyone, Chris Natzke here with Black Belt Leadership Speaking and Coaching with your Mind of a Champion tip of the week on Facebook Live. Today I want to talk about the power of questions and how they impact us in our leadership roles. You know, leadership in times of challenge, we really have to be multifaceted. Number one, when we're in the present moment, we have to be able to distinctly look at what's going on and be able to use our leadership tools and the toolbox that we've created in leadership to be able to handle situations when they're right in front of us. In addition to that, leaders also are very adept at understanding the past. And so being able to draw from lessons that they've had in the past to bring them forward when challenge does arise. And what also leaders need to be great at is being able to project into the future and be able to hold the vision for not only themselves, but their organization, particularly when things get tough. Because leaders become the holders, the guardians of the vision. And now what's really interesting though is when things begin to hit the proverbial fan and things come a little bit, go a little bit sideways, our ability to ask powerful questions is really one of our greatest resources. In fact, it's often been said that the quality of our life and the quality of our organizations is really in direct proportion to the questions we ask ourselves. And so I want to talk about this concept of what if questions. And you see over my shoulder here, I've got a notepad where I'm going to kind of use this as a little bit of a prop. And I want to give some props out to my friend Rob Martin. I asked for some feedback on these and he says, hey, why don't you use a whiteboard? So there you go, Rob. Thanks for the inspiration. So I want to talk about what I call are the 3 degrees of what if questions. And a what if question is, of course, using the word what if, and basically it can be used in 3 ways. I mean, it can be a way for us to really deal and get some creative ideas in the present moment, but it can also cause us to go down the rabbit hole. If we start to go and we start asking, what if this happens, what if that happens, and we start to really focus on the negative aspects, we'll start getting more of that as well. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to use these to our advantage, to be able to create what we want in our life and in our business. So let's talk about these 3 degrees of what if questions. And the first one is something I call a constructive what if question. Because again, challenges will arise in all aspects of our lives. But if we're able to use the what if question as a means of preparing in advance to those challenges happening, then now we're one leg up on them. And it's a great way to have that in our toolbox as leaders. An example I would think about is if I'm a football coach, for instance, and I begin to think, well, what if the defense shows us this particular front, this particular setup in defense? How are we going to deal with it? How are we going to move our offensive linemen to pass protect? What's going to be our hot read? What's the audible? That way, from the sports analogy, right, is used all the time. Coaches are constantly preparing. But in the business world and in our personal lives, we have that too. Like, for instance, what would happen if you run a business that's relying on suppliers and one of them may go out of business or may not be able to supply you? What's your secondary plan for being able to find the product that you need? Or what if somebody on your team is going to go down? There needs to be some sort of a succession plan so the team can continue to run and run well. And then finally, we need to be in our own lives. So from a personal standpoint, what if we have, say, elderly parents, and what is the contingency plan to use? In fact, they need help. So the idea there is great leaders create contingency plans. They ask what if, and they develop the plans to deal with those. And so really, in a word, great leaders prepare. And it makes me think of my college football coach, the late, great Dennis Green. And he used to always say is that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. So great leaders, by asking themselves what if questions, properly prepare, and they are using constructive what if questions. Now, interestingly enough, at least from my experience, oftentimes when things start going awry, we tend to go to the second one just by default, which I'll call affectionately catastrophic what-if questions. Now, what can happen there is they don't usually begin in that way, but we start saying, well, what if this happens and then that happens and then that happens, and we get ourselves on this domino effect of negative questions. being an entrepreneur and a small business owner for much of my adult life, I know that I've had times, and you may relate to this as well, is when cash flow might be a little tight, right? And so it's like, well, what if this sale doesn't come in, and what if I need to draw into my cash reserve, and then what if I lose my business, and what if I need to let go of employees, and pretty soon you're in this wild, this wild conversation inside your mind, and it's not productive. It's this energy that keeps us wrapping and wrapping and wrapping around until we just get all wound around the spoke. And what I've found is that when I've allowed myself to get in that place, but then I've been able to get out and I've been able to get through the challenge, more times than not, it never was as bad as I thought it was going to be. In fact, oftentimes it was just fine, and or it ended up better because of the learning that I received from it. So when we're in this leadership position and we have an opportunity to ask ourselves those questions, basically that catastrophic version of the what if question is certainly something that we want to avoid. But then comes the next and the final, which is creative what if questions. Because even when we are up against it, and even when things are starting to fly all around us and we don't know maybe what to do, if we pause and allow even those feelings of anxiety and fear to just come up, feel them and let them pass through us, then we can slow down and look at things objectively. We have the ability now to ask questions that are much more empowering. And so these might be questions like, well, what if this thing that I'm going through right now is actually to help me grow and expand in my business? What if this is telling me that I need to make some dramatic changes? And what would those changes be? What if this thing that I'm going through right now in my life or my business is actually teaching me that I've got some areas in my life that I need to let go? And what would happen if I did that? What if this is teaching me that I've got a whole new way of looking at my life, and that if I look at things differently, it can be totally expansive for me. I can grow from this experience. See, it's the power of question, my friends. And I need to remind myself of this all the time, because the power of our questions and the life that we live is in direct proportion to those qualitative questions we ask. So the question I have for you this week is, how can you use more empowering, from a standpoint of being constructive or creative, what if questions in your life and in your business? Where do you have an opportunity to really lean into those? Where is there an opportunity for growth and expansion in what's going on in your life and business just by shifting the way that you ask those questions? And finally, I'd say, what if anything was possible, right? So anyway, thanks so much for listening to me. Absolutely love doing these. Give me some feedback if you like the whiteboard behind me. Thanks, Rob, again for giving me that little nudge to go out on a little limb here and use this as a little tool. But this week, think about the questions and that you're asking yourself, and also how that can impact yourself in your life and in your leadership roles. So once again, this has been Chris Natzke from Black Belt Leadership Speaking and Coaching. If you liked what you heard here, please feel free to share it, like it, comment, and we'll see you next time on the Mind of the Champion Tip of the Week.